Hey, this is Thad from True 316, and we are back with our YouTube podcasting. And today I thought we would continue on with the book of Revelation and examine the topic of the 144,000. Who are they? So let's go ahead and jump right in. Actually, before we do, let me just say if you are catching this as your first experience with my podcast, then please go ahead and take a look at the topic of Revelation, where we examine chapter 20, and I explain things like the analogy of faith, how we're to be consistent with the scriptures, and work together the consistency of the scriptures in harmony with themselves so that we can utilize the interpretation of factors such as the genre of the book, which the book of Revelation is apocalyptic literature, very highly symbolic. And so we have to know how to handle that. And one of the main factors is that we shouldn't handle this book or interpret it any differently than it was interpreted by those who received the book in the first place, those of the first century. It's pretty typical for most of us in our generation here to understand the idea of a future millennial kingdom, and as well as that, looking and reading the book of Revelation in a very chronological manner. But let's just take a look at this 144,000 and see what exactly we're dealing with here. So the 144,000, who are they anyway? Let's go ahead and start with that. And the first aspect is my supposition is that these 144,000 represent believers through the era from the time of Christ until his second coming. This is who I believe the 144,000. Now, that might sound weird. The other idea that you might be more familiar with is that the 144,000 represent exactly 12,000 of the 12 tribes of each of the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's where you get 144,000. But really quick, the idea of 12 being a complete number throughout the scriptures is very coherent throughout the entirety of the scriptures. And we have 12, which represents the 12 tribes. And what about the other 12? What would be the other 12? Well, that could be speaking of the time of the apostles. You got 12 tribes, and then the New Testament, you have the 12 apostles representing the New Testament. So you have 12 times 12. And then if you look back at our study in Revelation 20, 1,000 times that, 1,000 just represents a very large indeterminate number. Okay. So it doesn't have to be an exact number. If you stick with being too literal on your interpretation, you're not going to be consistent with the scriptures and with the interpretation throughout this book, and it'll make it more difficult. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next slide here and read from chapter 7, where this topic begins of the 144,000. It says, "After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth, or on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God, and he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, 'Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the slaves of our God on their foreheads.'" That verse 3 should actually stand out to us, in particular in regard to the sealing of the slaves of God on their forehead. This is a very consistent theme throughout the scriptures. So we will not address this right now, but it should stand out to you. Verse 4 is where we have 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And it says from the tribe of Judah, 12,000, and so on. I'm not going to read them all. And then finally, with the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 having been sealed. So again, 12 specific tribes listed times 12,000 equals 144,000. That's where that number comes from. Now let's just hold on to that thought for a minute before we try to do anything else with it. And let's go back to an earlier thought about what this really might look like in your mind as you're envisioning this. This would be from the dispensational viewpoint. Most of us would be familiar. John MacArthur would hold this view. This is the view that I actually held for many years. But it took a while to progress out of this because I kept running into conflicts within the interpretation. And let's just take a look at what this interpretation is. And again, let's see what we might be familiar with. This is just a simple timeline, and we have our first coming here with Christ and his death and his resurrection, and then we have a historical event, 70 AD, where we have the temple destruction. And then at some time in the future, if you're in this dispensational mindset, we are waiting. This is the church age, this blue arrow here. This is the church age. We are waiting for a rapture. So this would be the coming of Christ, where he gathers those, not a return to earth, but he gathers those. He raptures believers unto himself, and they're forever with the Lord. But this inaugurates this tribulation period of 7 years that most would say. And then throughout that tribulation period, things get worse and worse. And then we have the second coming that would take place at the end of that 7 years, where Christ would come and reign on earth for 1,000 years with the saints. So that's one just general view. And when I say that, that might sound pretty comfortable for a lot of us. But the idea is at this time where we would be thinking the rapture, we would think that would be the end of the age of the Gentiles, and there would be no Christians left on earth. But this 144,000 that we've been talking about would then be a group of Jews elected by God unto salvation to be the ministers of the gospel through this tribulation period. Okay, that would be the dispensational view for the most part, without getting into too many other details. So that would be that particular view. But where do we get this from? And why are we reading it that way when we have more clues that might explain to us who these 12 tribes, each of the 12,000 people, so 144,000 altogether, who they really might be? So let's drop back a couple of chapters to chapter 5, and let's see how the book reads in this particular chapter, because if the genre of the book and the author is consistent with how he's explaining details of different aspects or subjects even, maybe he's going to use the same pattern in the future, and so that'll be important to us. So let's just take a look at verse 5, or chapter 5 here, beginning in verse 1. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sits on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed up with 7 seals. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. Then I was crying greatly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. So here we have John in the heavenly throne room scene, which we had just read in chapter 4. And now we have this really big event that there's somebody on the throne that has the scroll, and nobody's worthy to take the scroll from the one who's on the throne. And so we've all heard this before, but John is weeping bitterly because of this whole event. So then in verse 5, one of the elders said to me, "John, stop crying. Behold, the Lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has overcome so as to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw in the midst of the throne the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. So here we have this really powerful and dramatic scene. And here's the question: what does John hear? And then what does he see? So what does he hear? He hears the elder say, "Stop crying. Behold, the Lion that is from the tribe of Judah." So what does he hear? The Lion from the tribe of Judah, the Root of David. And then what? Then he hears something. Then he sees something. After he hears about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he sees what? He sees in the midst of the throne a lamb standing as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes. So he hears one thing. He hears the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and then he turns and he sees what? A lamb as it had been slain. Now, wait a minute. We have 2 different symbols here, but what do they represent? They represent one thing, don't they? They represent, of course, Jesus Christ, who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He was the Passover lamb who was slain for the transgressions of myself and all those who would ever believe in him. So he hears one thing and then he sees another. Let's carry this forward into chapter 7 and see what might happen. In verse 4, I heard, take note, I heard the number of those having been sealed, what? 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. That's what he heard. And now, what are we going to have happen? In verse 9, after this I looked, I saw and beheld a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. Oh, if we just pause and slow down for a minute, what happens? He hears the 144,000, right? But then he sees, immediately in the same passage, he sees a great multitude, which includes people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. So these are all clothed in white robes, palm branches. These are the saints. These are all the saints. And when does this take place? This takes place after the resurrection, after Pentecost, when the gospel is told to go forth. Of course, it goes forth to Judah, Jerusalem, Samaria, and then to the outer reaches of the earth. So it begins in Jerusalem, right? Because that's where the gospel was to go forth. First, it's preached to the Jews, and then it goes out to the Gentiles, and it progressively works its way outward from the city of Jerusalem to Samaria, which is a kind of a crossbreeding of Jews and Gentiles, those who worship at a different temple, and then the true gospel message is preached to them as well, that it's all in Jesus Christ, that he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, that he is the lamb slain, that he is the true sacrificial lamb, and then also to all the Gentiles, people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. And you know what? If you recall from Revelation 20 study that we did, this was the exact reason that Satan was bound for 1,000 years, so that the nations would no longer be deceived until that 1,000 years was up. So the 1,000 years we talked about being symbolic, it just being a large indefinite number. Here we have 144,000, 12 and 12, Old Testament, New Testament, or Jews and Gentile believers, 1,000 being a multitude, an indefinite number, but one time pattern or one time purpose given from the time of the cross to the second coming. So we'll talk more about the second coming maybe in another cast, but I want to keep this as short as possible. If you have any questions, feel free to list them. If you have any pushback, feel free to present that as well. This is a difficult book, and I'm looking to grow and learn, and even have my suppositions challenged and modified, because I've gone from position to position based on the evidence throughout time, through spending time in the Word and having people plug into me. And this is what I appreciate, because it's pretty hard to be stuck in what opinions we think that we believe, and we don't like change too much. But if we're getting closer and closer to the truth of the Word of God, it's going to be beneficial to us. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day, and we'll see you then. Thank you. God bless.